USAF captain jokingly asked an old veteran his rank, until his reply made the entire mess freeze. The silence in the room felt deafening. The air seemed to hold its breath as the words, "Iron Viper," echoed in the ears of every officer present. The young captain, still standing there, could feel the weight of those two words pressing down on him. His smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a creeping doubt he couldn't shake. The room, once filled with laughter and banter, now felt heavy with anticipation. What had he just stumbled upon? Who was this old man sitting in front of him? The captain glanced around, hoping to find an answer in the faces of his fellow officers, but all he saw were confused looks and stunned silence. The atmosphere had shifted, and no one quite knew how to handle it. Still sitting calmly, the veteran's eyes didn't leave the table. His posture remained steady, his hands resting on the surface in front of him. He didn't need to say more. The silence in the room spoke volumes. The captain finally managed to find his voice, though it was shaky. "What does that mean? Iron Viper? I don't understand." The elderly man didn't immediately respond. He simply sat there, allowing the question to hang in the air. He could feel the young captain's eyes on him, but he didn't look up. His mind wandered back to a time long ago, a time when the name Iron Viper had meant something. A time when he had been more than just an old man sitting in a military dining hall. A time when he had been in the thick of battle, fighting alongside men who respected him, feared him, and counted on him. It was in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, back during the height of the Vietnam War, where the name had been forged. The jungle was hot, oppressive, and unrelenting. The noise of distant artillery fire echoed through the trees, and the thick air was filled with the stench of sweat and gunpowder. He had been a part of an elite unit, one that operated in the shadows, behind enemy lines, tasked with missions so dangerous that few knew they even existed. They called him Iron Viper because of his speed, his precision, and his unyielding will to survive. The memories were sharp, vivid. He remembered the adrenaline, the fear, and the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers. There had been moments of terror, yes, but there had also been moments of triumph. He had carried his fellow soldiers out of the most perilous situations, patched them up when they were wounded, and fought until his last breath to ensure they made it home. The name, Iron Viper, had been a testament to his toughness, to his resilience in the face of death. It was not just a name, it was a legacy. But now, all those years later, the name seemed to have lost its meaning to the younger generation. To them, it was just an old man's title, a relic from a bygone era. The captain, clearly uncomfortable with the silence that had settled in the room, stepped back a few paces. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what he had just learned. There was something in the veteran's eyes, something that made him uneasy. This was no ordinary old man. The captain had heard stories about veterans who had been involved in covert operations, but he never expected to meet one. Not here, not now. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Finally, the young lieutenant, who had been standing off to the side, took a step forward. He had been watching the exchange with growing suspicion, and now he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Sir," he said, addressing the captain, "I think we should check the records. He's not just some old guy, he might actually be someone important." The captain looked at the lieutenant, clearly flustered, but nodded. "You're right. We need to get more information." The lieutenant quickly pulled out his phone and began typing, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. A few moments later, he looked up, his face pale. "Sir, this guy, this Iron Viper, he's on the list. He's a legend. He's one of the most decorated veterans we've ever had. He's saved more lives than anyone can count. He's a hero." The captain's stomach dropped. He had no idea who he was dealing with. All of his bravado had crumbled in an instant. He had mocked a man who had been through hell and come out the other side with a legacy. Before he could say anything, a voice from the back of the room interrupted him. "Captain," the voice was low but commanding. "Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" Everyone turned to see a senior officer entering the room. The officer's face was grim, and his uniform was impeccably pressed. He was a colonel, and his presence commanded immediate attention. He had been in the room earlier, but had stepped out just before the confrontation began. Now, he was back, and his eyes were fixed on the old veteran. "That man you've been mocking," the colonel said, his voice carrying authority, "is a living legend. You've just disrespected someone who has earned more than you could ever dream of. The captain, his face flushed with embarrassment, looked down at the veteran, who was still sitting in his seat, calm and composed. He had no words. Get up, the colonel ordered. You need to show respect. Now, the room was still, the tension palpable. Everyone knew what was coming next. The colonel's next words would change everything. Sergeant Major, the colonel said, turning to the veteran, it's an honor to have you here. Please, allow me to make it right. The veteran finally stood up. His movements were slow but deliberate. He had the demeanor of a man who had seen it all. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice steady. But I've seen worse than this. The colonel nodded and turned to the captain, his expression hardening. You will apologize, he said, and you will do it in front of everyone. The captain, now realizing the gravity of his mistake, swallowed hard. He stepped forward, his voice shaky as he spoke. Sergeant Major, I'm sorry. I didn't know. The veteran nodded, accepting the apology, but the room remained silent, each person processing the shift in power that had just taken place. The room was thick with tension, the weight of the colonel's words still hanging heavily in the air. The captain stood, his face a mix of confusion and embarrassment, while the old veteran, now standing with the calm dignity of someone who had seen and experienced far more than any of them, simply observed. There was an unspoken understanding between the two men, a silent acknowledgement that words alone could never fully capture the gravity of what had just happened. The veteran, his back straight and his gaze unwavering, seemed to have accepted the apology, but the captain knew this moment was far from over. He had just humiliated a man whose name would never be forgotten, a man whose legacy was built on blood, sweat, and sacrifice, a man who had served his country with honor long before the captain had even thought about enlisting. The colonel, seeing the captain's struggle, motioned for him to step aside. The veteran, whose name was now known to all, had an aura about him, an aura that demanded respect, not just because of his rank or his service, but because of the silent wisdom that seemed to emanate from every pore of his being. Sergeant Major, the colonel said, his voice now softer, more respectful. Please, if you would. The old man nodded, and without a word, he turned and walked towards the door. The colonel followed, and soon, the rest of the officers, including the young captain, found themselves trailing behind him. They exited the dining hall, walking down the long corridor, past the rows of military awards, plaques, and portraits that lined the walls. The sound of their footsteps echoed, a reminder that they were heading towards something important. As they approached the parking lot, the sergeant major paused. He didn't look at the others, but instead, his eyes focused on the distant horizon. The captain, still unable to fully comprehend what he had witnessed, stepped forward hesitantly. Sergeant Major, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. The old man didn't turn to look at him, but he spoke, his voice calm and steady. It's not your fault, Captain. You didn't know, but now you do. The words hit the captain harder than he expected. It wasn't just a reprimand, but an acknowledgement of the gap between the young and the old, between those who had lived through the wars and those who only read about them. The sergeant major turned slowly, meeting the captain's gaze for the first time. You're here to serve, just like I did. But the real question is, how will you serve? Will you lead with respect, or will you be led by arrogance? The captain stood silent, unsure how to respond. The sergeant major didn't wait for an answer. He simply walked away, his steps steady and purposeful, like a man who had nothing to prove, yet everything to offer. The colonel stepped closer to the captain, his voice low but firm. Listen to him, he said. He's forgotten more about honor and service than you'll ever know. The captain nodded, his chest tightening. He had always thought of himself as a leader, as someone who commanded respect by the very nature of his uniform. But now, after witnessing that brief exchange, he realized how much he still had to learn. The sergeant major, though no longer in his prime, still carried with him a legacy that none of them could match. The captain's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a motorcade approaching. The colonel's eyes narrowed as he looked toward the vehicles, then turned back to the captain. Get in, he said. We're going to make this right. The captain, still shaken, followed the colonel to the waiting cars. As they drove toward the base's command center, the reality of the situation began to sink in. He wasn't just facing a mistake. He was facing a moment that could change the way he viewed his service, his duty, and his respect for those who had come before him. The motorcade arrived at the base with precision, the vehicles halting just outside the main entrance. The sergeant major had already arrived, and he was waiting by the entrance, his posture as perfect as it had been in the dining hall. The captain stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of his earlier mistake. He had no excuses, no way to undo the damage. But he could make things right. The colonel walked ahead, followed by the captain, who hesitated for a moment before stepping forward to address the sergeant major. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice steady but filled with respect, "I'm truly sorry for what happened earlier. I didn't understand, but I do now. You've earned more respect than anyone in that room. I owe you that." The sergeant major looked at him, his eyes unreadable. For a moment, there was silence, then he nodded, just once. "It's good to see you finally understand," he said quietly. With that, the moment of tension passed. The sergeant major turned and began walking toward the building, the captain following closely behind him. He had learned more in those few minutes than he ever could have in any training session or lecture. The true lesson was not in rank, not in medals or ribbons, but in respect, humility, and the legacy of those who had fought before him. And as they entered the command center, the captain knew that from this moment on, he would lead differently. Not just with authority, but with the understanding that respect had to be earned, and that honor wasn't something you wore, it was something you lived. As the doors to the command center slid open, the captain found himself stepping into a different world, one that felt far removed from the dining hall, the mockery, and the mistakes of the past. The room was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of equipment and the rustle of papers. The colonel led the way, and the captain followed, feeling the weight of every step. He had thought he understood what it meant to be a leader, but now, after the events of the past few hours, he realized just how little he had truly known. The sergeant major was already in the room, standing by a map table, his hands folded behind his back. He didn't look at them, but the way he held himself, straight, unwavering, made it clear that he wasn't there by accident. He belonged in this room. The colonel approached the sergeant major, and after a brief exchange of words, turned to the captain. "This man," the colonel said, his voice firm, "is not just a legend. He is a part of our history. You are going to learn from him, whether you want to or not." The captain stood silently, the weight of those words sinking in. He had thought he was here to help lead, to command, but now it felt as if he was here to be taught. The colonel's eyes softened, just for a moment, before he spoke again. "You see," the colonel began, "men like the sergeant major don't ask for recognition. They don't need medals or praise. They do what they do because it's their duty. And when you've done your duty as he has, you don't need anyone else's validation." The captain nodded, though he didn't fully understand yet. The sergeant major turned slowly, his eyes meeting the captain's with a steady, unwavering gaze. The silence stretched between them, the weight of unspoken words filling the air. Finally, the sergeant major spoke, his voice calm, yet filled with authority. "I didn't serve for medals," he said. "I didn't serve for recognition. I served because it was what was right. And sometimes, that's the hardest part of the job, knowing you may never be recognized, but still doing it anyway." The captain felt the sting of those words, a reminder of his earlier arrogance, of the easy way he had dismissed the old man. "You don't wear your service on your sleeve," the sergeant major continued, "because you know what it's like to give everything for something bigger than yourself." The captain looked down at his uniform, the medals on his chest suddenly feeling out of place, as if they were something he had never truly earned. The sergeant major's words cut deep, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to serve. The colonel motioned for the captain to follow him. "Let's get you started," he said, leading the way toward a new assignment, one that would test everything the captain thought he knew. The captain followed without hesitation, but his mind was elsewhere. He was no longer concerned about how he appeared or what others thought of him. He was thinking about the lessons he had just learned, about the man who stood before him, unbowed by time, whose silent authority had commanded more respect than any rank or title ever could. The sergeant major remained in the background, watching them leave with quiet dignity. His role here wasn't to be a part of the drama, but to teach the next generation through his actions. As they walked down the hall, the captain finally found the courage to speak. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice steady, I want to know more. I want to learn from you. The old man turned to look at him, and for the first time, a small, knowing smile played at the corner of his lips. You're starting to get it, he said softly. And that's a good place to begin. The captain couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride at those words. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally on the path to becoming the kind of leader he had always aspired to be. But he knew this journey would take time, and he was ready to take the first step. Together, they walked into the unknown, where the lessons of the past would shape the future. And for the first time, the captain felt ready to truly serve, not just as an officer, but as a man who understood the true meaning of sacrifice and respect. The next few days were a blur for the captain. The old man, the sergeant major, had agreed to take him under his wing, and each lesson was a lesson in humility. The captain had learned more in those few days than he had in years of training. He had come to realize that his education had just begun, and the journey ahead would challenge him in ways he could never have anticipated. As the captain and the sergeant major moved through the halls of the base, they passed by young recruits, who stood at attention when they saw the old man. The captain couldn't help but notice the way everyone respected him. It wasn't just the obvious things, his impeccable uniform, his military bearing. It was the way the sergeant major carried himself. It was as if he had earned the right to be respected, not through rank or title, but through the sheer force of his presence. You see, the sergeant major said, his voice calm and measured, respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, and it's earned through action. You don't walk into a room and expect people to look at your rank. You expect them to look at your actions. The captain nodded, taking it all in. He had spent so much of his life focused on the external, the uniform, the titles, the honors, that he had never really understood what it meant to be a true leader. Now, he was beginning to see it. They entered the briefing room, where a group of officers were waiting for them. The captain took a seat, but his mind wasn't on the briefing. His thoughts were still on the sergeant major, on the way he had been dismissed so casually and wrongly just days before. Now, the room was silent when the old man entered. The officers stood at attention, their faces a mixture of awe and respect. The captain noticed that the sergeant major didn't have to say a word. His presence was enough. I've spent my life in the field, the sergeant major began, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience, and I've seen things that no one should ever have to see. But I've also learned the most important lesson of all. It's not about how many battles you've won. It's about how you treat the people who fought alongside you. The room was still, everyone listening intently. The captain was captivated. He had been so focused on personal achievement, on climbing the ranks, that he had never truly considered the importance of the people around him. The sergeant major continued, if you lead from the front, but you forget the men and women who make that possible, then you're not a leader. You're just a man in a uniform. The captain felt a wave of realization wash over him. He had been so caught up in the pursuit of recognition that he had forgotten what true leadership meant. As the briefing continued, he found himself listening more closely than ever before. He was no longer just hearing the words, but truly absorbing the lessons they contained. After the meeting, the sergeant major gave the captain a simple but powerful task. Go out there, he said, and talk to the men and women who serve with you. Don't talk down to them. Don't tell them what to do. Ask them how they're doing. Find out what they need. And most importantly, listen. The captain wasn't sure how he would be received. He had spent so much of his career giving orders, not listening to the ones he commanded. But he knew, deep down, that this was exactly what he needed to do. The next day, he walked the base, stopping to speak with soldiers, airmen, and sailors alike. At first, they were hesitant, unsure of what to make of the officer who had once stood above them. But as the captain listened, truly listened, they began to open up. It wasn't just about their jobs or their duties. It was about their lives, their struggles, their hopes, and their fears. The captain realized that this was where true leadership began, not with the words he spoke, but with the understanding he gained from those who served beside him. Over the next few weeks, the captain made it a point to continue his conversations, to connect with his fellow servicemen and women in ways he never had before. Slowly, he began to notice a change. The officers, who had once viewed him as a superior, now saw him as a leader. The enlisted men, who had once kept their distance, now spoke to him with respect. And the sergeant major, watching from a distance, nodded with approval. One afternoon, as the captain walked across the base, he saw the sergeant major standing by the gate, his eyes scanning the horizon. The old man looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something that resembled pride in his eyes. "You're getting it," the sergeant major said, his voice low but steady. "You're learning what it means to lead. And that's a lesson that will serve you for the rest of your life." The captain felt a swell of gratitude. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the dining hall that first day. He had learned humility. He had learned to listen. He had learned what it truly meant to serve. And as he stood there, looking at the sergeant major, he realized that his journey had only just begun. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a leader, one who understood the true meaning of respect, sacrifice, and service. The captain stood in front of the barracks, his gaze lingering on the familiar surroundings that had once felt like home. Yet, now they felt different. He had changed. In the past few weeks, the lessons from the sergeant major had transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The weight of those lessons still sat heavily on his shoulders, but now, they were shaping him into the leader he had always wanted to become. As he walked through the base, his interactions with the soldiers had become more meaningful. Where once he had simply issued orders, he now sought their thoughts, their feedback, and their concerns. He was beginning to understand that leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility, understanding, and trust. The respect he had once demanded from his subordinates was now earned through action, not rank. The colonel had noticed the change as well. One afternoon, as the captain was finishing a briefing, the colonel approached him with a rare smile on his face. "You're doing well," the colonel said, his voice firm but approving. "I've seen the way the men respond to you now. They respect you, Captain." The captain nodded, grateful for the praise, but he knew it wasn't just his actions that had changed. It was his mindset. "It's more than that, sir," the captain replied. "I'm starting to understand what it means to truly serve, not just to lead." The colonel's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. And that's the difference between being a soldier and being a true leader. The best leaders serve first and lead second. The captain looked up, his mind racing with those words. The colonel was right. The real strength of leadership came from service, putting the needs of others before your own. That night, the captain sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few weeks. He had walked into the sergeant major's life with arrogance, only to be humbled by the lessons he had received. He had learned about respect, not just for others, but for himself as well. His thoughts drifted back to the first time he had seen the sergeant major, standing in the corner of the room, quiet and unassuming, yet radiating an authority that no one dared challenge. It was a kind of strength that didn't come from words or titles, but from years of service and sacrifice. The captain had seen that strength for what it truly was. The next morning, as the captain walked across the base, he saw a group of new recruits standing in line, waiting for their morning briefing. He paused for a moment, watching them, and then made his way over. As he approached, he could see the nerves on their faces. These were young men and women, eager but unsure of what lay ahead. Without thinking, the captain stepped forward and addressed them. "I know you're all nervous," he began, his voice steady and calm. "I was too when I first started. But let me tell you something that took me a long time to learn. It's not about how fast you run, how much you can carry, or how many medals you earn. It's about how you serve the people around you, how you support each other, and how you lead by example." The recruits looked at him, surprised by the unexpected words of encouragement. For a moment, the captain felt a shift in the air, as if he had reached them in a way he had never reached anyone before. He wasn't just another officer standing before them. He was someone who had walked the path they were about to walk. And in that moment, he realized something important. He was no longer the man who had walked into the sergeant major's life with arrogance. He was someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with leadership. He was someone who had learned that true leadership wasn't about orders or rank. It was about sacrifice and service. As the captain finished speaking, one of the recruits spoke up, his voice shaky but sincere. "Sir, what makes you a leader?" The captain paused for a moment, considering the question. It wasn't something he had ever really thought about before. He had always assumed that leadership came from the top, from the ones who gave orders and made decisions. But now, he understood that leadership was something earned through actions, through service. "Being a leader means serving those who follow you," he said slowly. "It means putting their needs before your own, and showing them the way, even when it's hard. Leadership is about earning trust, not demanding it. The recruits nodded, some with understanding, others with curiosity. The captain could see that they were beginning to understand the lesson, just as he had. He had learned from the sergeant major, and now, he was passing that lesson on. As the recruits returned to their duties, the captain turned to leave, his heart lighter than it had been in days. He wasn't perfect, and he knew there was still much to learn. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just an officer anymore. He was a leader who served first and led second. And as he walked back to his office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not in his rank, not in his accomplishments, but in the way he had learned to lead by example, to serve with humility, and to earn the respect of those around him. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The captain woke up early the next morning, the weight of his responsibilities heavier than ever. As he stood by the window of his quarters, looking out at the sprawling military base, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of resolve. His transformation over the past few weeks had been nothing short of profound, but he knew he still had a long way to go. His interactions with the sergeant major had opened his eyes to what true leadership meant, and the lessons he had learned from the old man were already starting to take root. But now, it was time to put those lessons into action. Today would be different. The captain was assigned to lead a special operation, one that required both leadership and precision. His team was preparing for a live-fire exercise, and as the captain stood in the briefing room, he could feel the pressure mounting. He had trained for this moment his entire career, but now it was time to show that he could lead, not just command. The air was thick with anticipation as the soldiers, airmen, and technicians gathered around, waiting for instructions. The captain looked at them, his gaze steady and focused. It wasn't the same as before. He wasn't just looking at a group of soldiers anymore. He was looking at people who had placed their trust in him, and that trust had to be earned. He cleared his throat and began speaking. All right, everyone. Today's exercise is critical. We're going to push ourselves to the limit. But remember, it's not just about completing the task. It's about how we work together, how we support each other, and how we perform under pressure. The soldiers nodded, their faces serious. The captain could see the same resolve in their eyes that he had once seen in his own. But now he understood. It wasn't enough to just give orders. He had to be a part of the team, not above it. He continued. You all know your roles. But if something goes wrong, I want you to know this. We'll fix it together. No one is alone out there. As he finished speaking, the soldiers filed out of the room, each one heading to their designated positions. The captain followed them, his mind racing through the plan. He had reviewed the operation countless times, but now, as he stood on the field with his team, the reality of the situation set in. It was time to lead. The exercise began with a series of drills designed to test their coordination and communication under fire. The captain moved among his soldiers, offering guidance and ensuring that everything was running smoothly. The pressure was intense. The sounds of gunfire echoed across the field, the crack of bullets and the roar of engines filling the air. But despite the chaos, the captain remained calm. He could hear the voices of his team, each one, working together to complete their objectives. For the first time, he truly felt a part of something bigger than himself. As the exercise continued, the captain noticed something else. The soldiers weren't just following orders. They were thinking for themselves, making decisions on the fly, adjusting to the ever-changing conditions of the battlefield. The captain couldn't help but smile. This wasn't about him. It was about the team, and they were executing flawlessly. The exercise reached its peak as the team moved into a simulated combat zone. The captain was in the thick of it, coordinating the troops, offering direction, and making split-second decisions. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. The team worked like a well-oiled machine, and the captain felt a surge of pride. This was leadership, true leadership, where every decision mattered, and every person played an integral role. As the exercise concluded, the team gathered together in the after-action review. The captain stood at the front, his heart racing with adrenaline. But there was something else, something deeper. He had led them through the most intense part of the operation, and they had succeeded. He knew that this wasn't just about completing the mission. It was about earning their respect and trust, and he had done that. The sergeant major's words echoed in his mind. It's not about how many battles you've won. It's about how you treat the people who fought alongside you. The captain turned to face his team. Great work today, everyone. You all did fantastic. But let's not stop here. We've learned a lot, and we'll keep pushing ourselves. As the team clapped each other on the back and began to head back to their quarters, the captain stayed behind for a moment. He stood alone on the field, the cool evening breeze brushing against his face. It was a rare moment of peace, and he allowed himself a brief pause to reflect. He had come a long way since the day he first walked into that dining hall, mocking the old man sitting quietly in the corner. He had learned what it meant to be a leader, and more importantly, he had learned what it meant to serve. But today, as he looked around at the soldiers who had followed him, he knew that he had truly earned their respect. And that, he realized, was what leadership was all about. As the days passed, the captain found himself reflecting more and more on the lessons he had learned. His time with the sergeant major had forever changed the way he viewed leadership, responsibility, and what it truly meant to serve. The old man's words, his actions, had left an indelible mark on him. And now, as he stood on the edge of the training field, watching his team prepare for another exercise, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. The base was bustling with activity as usual, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. The soldiers, airmen, and technicians no longer viewed the captain simply as an officer. They respected him, not because of his rank or title, but because of the way he had earned it, through humility, service, and a genuine commitment to his people. He had stopped being just an officer. He had become a leader. The exercise that day would test their coordination under pressure, a critical mission requiring flawless execution. The captain had been preparing his team for weeks, and today was the culmination of their hard work. The stakes were high, but for the first time, he wasn't just worried about how well the team would perform. He was focused on ensuring that they worked together, that they supported each other every step of the way. As he walked through the briefing area, he felt the eyes of his soldiers on him. They weren't waiting for orders anymore. They were waiting for him to guide them, to show them the way forward. The captain took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had been nervous about leading them before, uncertain about his ability to inspire them. But now, that fear was gone. He was ready. He gathered his team, speaking in a steady, confident voice. Today, we push ourselves harder than we've ever pushed before. But remember, it's not about individual success. It's about how we perform as a unit, how we cover each other, and how we stay focused on the mission. The soldiers listened intently, their expressions serious. There was no more doubt in their minds. They knew the captain had their backs. The exercise began, and immediately the captain saw his team spring into action. Each soldier moved with purpose, every action deliberate and calculated. The sound of gunfire filled the air as the team took their positions, clearing the simulated enemy obstacles with precision. The captain moved among them, offering guidance where needed, but mostly staying in the background, allowing them to execute on their own. The exercise was intense, the pressure high, but it was controlled. It was exactly what they had trained for. As the mission progressed, the captain noticed something extraordinary. The team was no longer just following orders. They were anticipating each other's moves, communicating without words, and adjusting to the situation as it unfolded. They were a cohesive unit, and the captain couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was leadership, not just giving orders, but fostering an environment where everyone could contribute, where everyone could lead in their own way. As the exercise neared its conclusion, the captain watched from a distance, his eyes scanning the field. The soldiers were operating with a level of coordination and confidence he hadn't seen before. The sergeant major's lessons were evident in everything they did. The team wasn't just performing well, they were excelling. And it wasn't just about the outcome. It was about how they got there, together. As the exercise ended, the captain walked over to the team, his heart pounding with excitement. He could see the satisfaction on their faces, but it wasn't the pride of victory that struck him. It was the camaraderie, the sense of collective achievement. They had done it together. Great work, everyone. The captain said, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. This wasn't just about completing the mission. This was about how we worked as a team. And today, you all proved what it means to have each other's backs. There was a moment of silence before the team erupted into applause, their respect for him evident in their cheers. The captain felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a feeling that he had earned their trust in a way he had never done before. The sergeant major had been right. True leadership wasn't about commanding from the front. It was about leading from within, earning the respect of those around you by showing that you were willing to serve them, to support them in every way possible. As the team dispersed, the captain stood there for a moment, reflecting on how far he had come. He wasn't the same man who had first walked into the sergeant major's presence, arrogant and self-assured. He had been humbled, shaped by the lessons of those who had come before him. And now, he was leading not just by rank, but by example. He had learned that leadership wasn't about titles. It was about actions. It was about how you treated people, how you earned their trust, and how you served them. And as he watched his team walk away, each soldier with their head held high, he knew that he had finally become the kind of leader he had always aspired to be. The captain stood by the window of his office, gazing out over the base, watching the soldiers go about their duties. It had been months since the fateful day he first met the sergeant major, and he was no longer the same man. His interactions with his team, the lessons from the sergeant major, and the experience of leading in combat had all shaped him into someone different, someone who truly understood what it meant to serve. The change was subtle, but it was there, and it was reflected in the way his team responded to him now. They no longer saw him as just an officer. They saw him as a leader, one who had earned their respect through action, not words. And that respect, he knew, was something that couldn't be taken for granted. But it wasn't just about his team. It was about the broader picture. The Army, the Air Force, the men and women in uniform who served together. He had always thought of leadership in terms of orders, of being in charge, but now he understood that leadership was about more than just giving commands. It was about creating an environment where people could thrive, where everyone worked together toward a common goal. And that was what the captain wanted to create. He wanted to build a culture of leadership, where every soldier, airman, and officer understood their role and contributed to the greater good. That was the true test of leadership, being able to inspire others to rise to their best. One morning, the colonel called the captain into his office. The captain was surprised. He had just finished an early morning run and had been looking forward to a quiet day. But as he entered the colonel's office, he could sense that something was different. The colonel was standing by his desk, his hands clasped behind his back. "Captain," the colonel said, his tone serious. "We have a situation. A convoy is scheduled to leave this afternoon for a classified mission. It's a high-stakes operation, and I need someone to lead the team." The captain's heart raced. This was what he had been training for, his chance to prove himself in a real, high-pressure situation. But as the colonel spoke, the captain's thoughts shifted. This wasn't just about him. It was about the people who would follow him, the soldiers who would look to him for guidance. He wasn't just leading a mission, he was leading a team. The colonel continued, "I know you've been doing well with your team, but this mission will require everything you've learned. It's not just about executing orders. It's about keeping your head under pressure, making decisions that could save lives. Are you ready for that?" The captain nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." The colonel looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. "Good. This will be a test, Captain, not just of your ability to lead, but of your ability to trust your team. Trust them to do their job, and trust them to back you up when you need it. Don't try to do everything on your own. Lead with confidence, but lead with humility." The captain took the words to heart. This mission wasn't just about him proving himself. It was about showing the team that he could lead them, not by commanding from the front, but by working with them, side by side. That afternoon, the captain stood in front of his team, ready for the operation. The soldiers, airmen, and technicians stood at attention, awaiting his orders. He could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but for the first time, he didn't feel burdened by it. He felt ready. He had prepared for this moment, not by memorizing plans or rehearsing speeches, but by learning how to serve and lead with humility. "All right, team," the captain said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "We have a job to do, but we're not just going to complete it. We're going to do it together, and we're going to do it right. I trust each of you to handle your part, and I will be right there with you, every step of the way." The team responded with nods of agreement, their eyes locked on the captain. They had seen him grow into the leader he was today, and they respected him for it. They trusted him. The convoy set off, and the mission unfolded smoothly, but not without its challenges. The captain had to make quick decisions under pressure, sometimes communicating with his team through radio, other times in person. He found himself relying on the skills of his soldiers and airmen, trusting them to do their jobs, and they did it without question. The mission was a success, but the true victory was in how the team had come together. As the operation concluded, the captain stood with his team, looking at them with pride. This wasn't just about completing the mission. It was about the trust they had built, the bond they had formed through shared experience. As they made their way back to base, the captain couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had been a man who once believed leadership was about control, about being in charge. But now, he understood that true leadership was about trust, about working together, and about showing the people who followed you that you had their back. The colonel had been right. This mission had been a test, not just of his leadership, but of his ability to trust his team. And in that, he had succeeded. But more than that, he had learned that leadership wasn't just about proving yourself. It was about proving that you could help others become the best version of themselves. As the captain walked back into the command center, he knew that the lessons of the past had shaped him into the leader he was meant to be. And there was still so much more to learn. The captain walked briskly down the narrow hallway of the command center, his footsteps echoing off the walls. It was late, and the base was quieter than usual. The usual hustle and bustle of the day had given way to the stillness of the night shift. He had just finished debriefing his team after the operation, and as he walked to his office, his mind was racing. It had been a successful mission, but there was always more to be done, more to learn, more to prove. The captain sat down at his desk, flipping through the mission reports. Each page felt like another small piece of the puzzle, a part of the larger picture he was beginning to understand. The more he led, the more he realized that every decision, every action, had a ripple effect. He was no longer just responsible for the success of his team. He was responsible for their well-being, for their trust, and for their safety. The weight of that responsibility was something he hadn't fully appreciated before. He'd always been a man driven by the idea of achieving greatness, of climbing the ranks, but now he saw that leadership wasn't about personal achievement. It was about lifting those around you, making them better, making them feel heard and supported. The sergeant major's words resonated in his mind. A true leader doesn't look to be the hero. A true leader makes others heroes. The captain closed the report and leaned back in his chair. The path ahead was clear, but it wasn't going to be easy. The team had made great strides, but he knew that the real work had only just begun. Leadership, he had learned, was a never-ending journey. There were always new challenges, new lessons, and new obstacles to overcome. And while he had earned the respect of his team, he knew that respect was something that had to be continuously earned. As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the sergeant major. The captain's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. The message was simple. Meet me at the range in the morning. There's something you need to see. The captain stared at the screen, unsure of what to make of the message. He had learned so much from the old man already, but there was always more to learn. The next morning, the captain arrived at the range just as the sun was rising. The cool morning air felt refreshing against his face as he approached the shooting lanes. The sergeant major was already there, standing by the target range, his silhouette outlined against the rising sun. The captain walked up, trying to gauge what the old man had in mind. "Morning, sir," the captain said, his voice respectful but curious. "What are we doing today?" The sergeant major didn't immediately respond. Instead, he pointed to the rifle on the bench. "Pick it up," he said simply. The captain hesitated for a moment before walking over to the bench and picking up the rifle. It was an old M1 Garand, a classic piece of military history. He had used more modern weapons in the field, but there was something about holding this rifle that made him feel like he was connecting with the past, with the legacy of the soldiers who had come before him. "You ever fired one of these?" the sergeant major asked. The captain shook his head. "I've used more modern weapons, but not this one." The sergeant major nodded. "Good. This is what you need to learn." The captain looked at him, puzzled. "But why?" "Because," the sergeant major said, his voice steady, "leadership isn't just about command. It's about understanding what your men are going through. It's about knowing what they carry, what they use, and how it feels to be on the front lines. You won't know how to lead them if you don't understand their challenges, their fears, and the tools they trust with their lives." The captain stood there for a moment, processing the words. He had never thought about it like that before. He had always viewed leadership as being at the top, directing others. But he was beginning to realize that true leadership meant putting yourself in their shoes, understanding their struggles, and having the humility to learn from them. "Now, take a shot," the sergeant major said, motioning to the target downrange. The captain nodded and moved into position. He hadn't fired a rifle like this in years, and he felt a sense of respect for the weapon, as well as a quiet nervousness. Taking a deep breath, he aimed down the sights, focusing on the target. The shot rang out, and the captain watched as the bullet hit the target with a solid thud. He couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. But more than that, he felt connected to the men and women who had used this same weapon in the past, who had fought and sacrificed for the same values he now upheld. The sergeant major didn't say anything at first, just nodded in approval. "Not bad," he said after a moment. "But it's not about hitting the target. It's about how you handle the recoil, how you recover, and how you adjust." The captain looked at him, a new understanding dawning. "So it's not just about the shot. It's about the whole process, the whole experience." "Exactly," the sergeant major replied. "That's how leadership works. It's not about the final product, the one perfect shot. It's about how you handle the ups and downs, the challenges and the setbacks. It's about how you adjust and keep moving forward, even when things don't go as planned." The captain stood in silence for a moment, reflecting on the words. It was a simple lesson, but it was one that would stick with him for the rest of his career. Leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience, about handling setbacks and continuing to move forward. As they wrapped up their session, the sergeant major clapped him on the shoulder. "You've come a long way, Captain, but there's still more to learn. Keep moving forward." The captain nodded, the weight of the lesson settling in. As he walked away from the range, he knew that his journey was far from over. There would always be more to learn, more to prove, but for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. The captain stood on the edge of the training field, watching his team gear up for the next operation. The morning sun was already beating down, casting long shadows over the base as the soldiers moved with purpose, preparing for the day's exercises. It was early, but the air was thick with the energy of anticipation. The captain had been through many operations in his career, but none had felt as meaningful as the ones he had been leading recently. He had changed, not just as an officer, but as a leader. He had learned more in the past few months than he had in the previous years of his service. Each day brought a new challenge, but it was the lessons from the sergeant major that had shaped him into someone who understood that leadership wasn't about dominance or control. It was about service and understanding. He had learned to serve his men, to listen to their concerns, and to guide them not just with orders, but with support. The captain felt the weight of his role, but it wasn't the same burden he had once felt. It was a responsibility he now embraced, knowing that every decision he made could affect the lives of those who followed him. He knew he had to lead with humility, strength, and, above all, integrity. As his team gathered around for the morning briefing, the captain stood at the front, his eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers, airmen, and technicians who had become more than just his subordinates. They had become his team. He had worked hard to build that trust, and it showed in the way they looked at him now. There was respect in their eyes, but it wasn't the kind that came from rank. It was the kind that came from shared experience, from working together toward a common goal. "All right, everyone," the captain said, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of his words. "Today's exercise is going to push us all, but remember, we're in this together. There's no mission without each one of you. I'm counting on every one of you to do your part. If something goes wrong, we fix it together. If we succeed as a team." The soldiers nodded, their expressions hardening with determination. The captain could see the fire in their eyes. They were ready, and they trusted him to lead them. As the exercise began, the captain moved through the ranks, watching his team execute the plan. He wasn't just overseeing them anymore. He was working alongside them, offering guidance when needed, and stepping back to let them take the lead when the moment was right. The operation was complex, requiring precision and coordination. It was the kind of exercise that could easily fall apart if any one member of the team faltered. But the captain had faith in his team, and they had proven time and time again that they were capable of handling whatever challenges came their way. As the exercise unfolded, the captain watched as his team moved like a well-oiled machine. Communication was seamless, their movements precise, and their reactions instinctive. There were no more doubts, no more hesitation. They were working together as one. It was a sight to behold, and the captain felt a surge of pride. This was what true leadership looked like. This was what it meant to lead by example, to build trust, and to empower others to step up and lead in their own right. The exercise reached its climax when an unexpected challenge arose. A piece of equipment malfunctioned, and the team had to adapt quickly to avoid a setback. Without missing a beat, the captain gave clear, concise instructions, but he also trusted his team to solve the problem themselves. The soldiers worked together, each one contributing their skills and expertise. Within minutes, the situation was resolved, and the exercise continued without further interruption. The captain watched the team work, his heart swelling with pride. It was moments like this that reminded him why he had chosen this path. Leadership wasn't about being the smartest person in the room or having all the answers. It was about trusting those around you to do their job and supporting them when needed. As the exercise came to a close and the team gathered for the after-action review, the captain stood in front of them, his mind replaying the events of the day. He had seen growth in his team, in himself, and in the way they had come together to face the challenges. "You all did outstanding today," the captain said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "But what matters more than anything is how we came together to solve the problems as a team. We all had a part to play, and we all played it well." The team stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the words. Then, one by one, they nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. They had earned the captain's respect, just as he had earned theirs. As the team dispersed, the captain stood for a moment, watching them walk away. He had been tested that day, and so had they. But it wasn't just about passing the test. It was about how they had faced the challenges together, how they had worked as one unit, supporting each other every step of the way. The captain walked back to his office, his thoughts still on the mission. He had learned so much in such a short time, but he knew that the journey was far from over. There was still much to learn, still much to prove. But for the first time, he felt a deep sense of peace. He was on the right path. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about knowing when to lead and when to step back. It was about building a team that could trust each other and face anything together. And that was exactly what he had, and what he would continue to build. The captain sat in his office, his gaze fixed on the stacks of paperwork in front of him, but his mind wasn't on the reports. His thoughts kept drifting back to the mission. The success of the operation had confirmed something he had already suspected, that the lessons he had learned were working. His team had pulled together in ways he hadn't seen in his earlier years of service, and he had seen the value of his leadership reflected in their actions. But as the days passed, he knew the hardest part was still ahead of him. The next challenge would test him in ways he hadn't yet experienced, and the stakes were higher than ever. He had been given the responsibility of leading a critical, high-stakes mission that would take him and his team behind enemy lines. It was an assignment that required both tactical precision and trust in his team, but the pressure weighed heavily on him. He had already proven he could lead, but this mission wasn't just about him. It was about his team, about making sure everyone came back safely. That was a responsibility he hadn't fully grasped until now. As he sat there, deep in thought, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from the colonel, brief but urgent. "Meet me in the command room in 30 minutes. We need to discuss the mission details." The captain stood up, immediately aware that whatever this meeting was about, it was going to be important. He left his office and made his way to the command room, where the colonel was waiting. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from the glowing maps on the wall. The colonel was standing by the map table, his expression serious. "Captain," the colonel greeted him, "this mission is critical. It's not just about taking out the enemy targets. It's about what happens after. We're looking at a major intel gathering opportunity, one that could shift the entire course of the operation." The captain nodded, taking in the gravity of the situation. "I understand, sir. We'll make sure to execute it flawlessly." "You're ready for this, Captain," the colonel said, locking eyes with him. "But there's something more at play here. This mission could mean the difference between success and failure for the entire operation. If we succeed, we'll have the upper hand. If we fail, the consequences could be disastrous." The weight of the colonel's words settled on him. He had faced tough situations before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about tactical knowledge. It was about making decisions under pressure that would affect not only his team's survival, but the success of the mission itself. "We'll be relying on you, Captain," the colonel continued. "The team trusts you. They're ready to follow your lead. But you need to be clear. You need to be decisive." "I won't let you down, sir," the captain replied, his voice firm, though a knot tightened in his chest. "Good," the colonel said. "Meet me at the briefing in 1 hour. We'll go over the specifics then." As the captain left the room, his mind was already running through the details of the mission, considering all the possible outcomes and contingencies. This was the moment he had been training for, but it was also the moment where everything he had learned would be put to the ultimate test. He met with his team in the briefing room, where they gathered around the table, ready to hear the mission details. The soldiers, airmen, and technicians looked to him with respect, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to overcompensate. He was ready, and they knew it. He had earned their trust. "All right, everyone," the captain began, his voice steady. "This mission is going to be one of the toughest we've ever faced. We're going behind enemy lines, and the operation has to be executed with precision. There will be no room for mistakes." The team nodded in unison, their eyes focused on him. "But remember this," the captain continued. "We're a team. We do this together. I trust each one of you to do your part. If something goes wrong, we fix it together. We've trained for this, and I know you're all ready." The team's resolve was clear. They had seen their captain lead them through tough situations before, but this mission was different. It would test their limits, challenge their skills, and push them to their breaking points. But they trusted each other, and that was what would carry them through. As they prepared for the mission, the captain knew the stakes were high, but he also knew that he had the support of the best team he could ask for. He wasn't in this alone. The mission began at first light. The team moved swiftly, following the carefully laid-out plan. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every possible obstacle accounted for. The captain was at the front, leading the way, his mind focused on the mission but constantly aware of the dangers that lurked ahead. The operation unfolded without a hitch, until it didn't. An unexpected obstacle arose, a complication the captain had not anticipated. The team found themselves in a position where they had to make quick decisions, and the pressure was mounting. It was moments like these that would define him, that would define them as a team. The captain took a deep breath, his mind racing through the possible solutions. "We adapt," he said, his voice calm but decisive. "We push forward, but we do it smart. Stick to the plan, but be ready to adjust." His team moved with efficiency, following his lead, executing each task flawlessly. As the mission came to a close, the team gathered once again, their mission complete, their objective accomplished. The captain felt a sense of pride, but it wasn't the kind of pride that came from the success of the mission alone. It was the pride that came from knowing that they had done it together, that they had trusted each other, that they had overcome the challenges as a team. As they made their way back to base, the captain looked at his team. They had earned this victory, and he had earned their respect. He wasn't just a leader anymore. He was one of them, and that was something he would never take for granted. The captain stood at the front of the base, the early morning light casting long shadows across the parade ground. It had been a long, challenging journey, but now, as he watched his team preparing for their next assignment, he felt a deep sense of peace. The transformation he had undergone wasn't just about leading in battle or executing a mission. It was about understanding what it meant to serve, to be part of something bigger than himself. The lessons he had learned from the sergeant major had reshaped him, but it was the men and women who followed him that had truly changed his perspective on leadership. He had always thought leadership was about being in charge, about issuing orders, and ensuring things went according to plan. But now, he understood that leadership was about trust in yourself and in those around you. It was about earning respect, not through authority, but through action, humility, and the ability to listen. He had earned their trust, and in turn, they had proven themselves time and time again. The bond they shared was built on shared experiences, challenges overcome, and respect for each other. As he walked down the line of soldiers, airmen, and technicians preparing for the next mission, the captain couldn't help but feel proud. The operation that lay ahead would be a difficult one, but he was confident in his team. They were ready. As he approached the sergeant major, who stood quietly at the edge of the formation, the captain couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for everything the old man had taught him. The sergeant major had been a guiding force, a mentor, and a symbol of everything the captain aspired to be. The sergeant major had shown him that true leadership wasn't about rank or accolades. It was about service, sacrifice, and the ability to inspire others to be their best. "You've come a long way," the sergeant major said quietly, his voice steady as always. "But the real test is never over. Every day, every mission, you're leading. And you're leading them by example." The captain nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He had learned so much, but he knew the journey wasn't finished. The path of leadership was one that never truly ended. It was a constant process of growth, learning, and serving. "Thank you," the captain said, his voice filled with respect. "I wouldn't be here without you." The sergeant major gave a small nod, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You're ready now," he said, the words carrying the weight of years of experience. "But remember, the true measure of a leader is not in how much power you have. It's in how much you're willing to give for the people who follow you." The captain stood in silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. The mission ahead was daunting, but he was no longer afraid of the challenges. He knew that his team would rise to the occasion, just as they always had. As the soldiers began to move out, the captain fell into step with them, walking alongside them instead of in front. This was the moment where his leadership would truly be tested, not in how he gave orders, but in how he supported them, how he guided them through the tough moments, and how he earned their respect through his actions. The mission was complex, and the pressure was intense. As they moved into position, the captain kept his eyes on his team, ensuring that everyone was in place, that everyone was ready. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a privilege. Leading wasn't about standing at the front and telling others what to do. It was about being there with them, every step of the way. As the mission unfolded, the captain's confidence in his team was proven right. They moved as one, adapting to the challenges and executing their tasks with precision. There were moments when things didn't go as planned, but they adjusted, communicated, and overcame every obstacle together. By the end of the operation, they had completed their mission successfully, and the captain couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This wasn't about the victory. It was about the way they had worked together, the way they had trusted each other, and the way they had led with integrity. As they returned to base, the captain took a moment to look around at his team, at the men and women who had made this possible. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were a family, and he was proud to lead them. That night, as he sat in his office, the captain reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the young officer who had once been so focused on power and authority, the one who had thought leadership was about commanding respect. And then he thought about the leader he had become, one who led through service, through example, and through a deep understanding of the people who followed him. He had come a long way, and though the journey was far from over, he knew he was on the right path. Leadership was a continuous process, a constant challenge. But now, he was ready for whatever came next.